What if one idea, not one battle, changed the course of American history? In the 1950s, U.S. leaders believed something terrifying. If one nation fell to communism, the rest would fall like dominoes. But what if that belief reshaped wars, politics, and even American identity itself? Tonight, we're uncovering the theory that pulled America deeper into global conflict, and asking the question most people never ask: was it strategy or fear? If you care about understanding how America's biggest decisions were made, make sure you like the video and subscribe, because history doesn't just explain the past, it explains the future. What if the most powerful nation in the world was guided not only by strength, but by fear? The year is 1945. World War II has just ended. Cities in Europe are rubble. Asia is exhausted. And the United States stands stronger than ever. Factories are running. The military is unmatched. The economy is expanding. But in the silence after victory, a new tension begins. The Soviet Union is no longer just an ally. It is a rival, not only in weapons, but in ideology. O mundo divide sem dois. Across Eastern Europe, governments begin to change. Poland, Hungary, Romania. One by one, they fall under Soviet influence. In Washington, this does not look like coincidence. It looks like expansion. And expansion feels permanent. American leaders begin asking a quiet question. If communism spreads in Europe, where does it stop? But Europe is only part of the picture. In 1949, something happens that sends a shockwave through the American political system. China becomes communist. A nation of hundreds of millions shifts alignment. And suddenly, the map of Asia looks different. Larger, redder, uncertain. The fear deepens. A sense of chaos de perda. Inside the United States, critics begin asking, who lost China? It is not just a foreign policy debate. It becomes political pressure. No administration wants to be remembered as weak. No president wants to be accused of allowing expansion. Strength becomes currency. Containment becomes doctrine. The Truman Doctrine had already promised resistance against communist influence. The Marshall Plan had rebuilt Western Europe. But Asia feels more fragile, more distant, harder to control, and harder to understand. A guerra de Korea eo sinal de alerta. Then comes 1950. North Korea invades South Korea. The United States intervenes. Not because Korea is economically essential, not because it holds vast natural resources, but because allowing one more country to fall feels dangerous. The war is brutal, costly, uncertain. And yet, when the fighting stabilizes, one belief becomes stronger in Washington. Communism is testing limits. If one nation falls without resistance, others may follow. Not gradually, but quickly. Like dominoes. A constructo de uma mentalidade. This is not yet called the domino theory, but the thinking is forming. The world is no longer seen as separate crises. It is seen as a chain reaction. Every decision becomes connected. Vietnam is no longer just Vietnam. Laos is not just Laos. Cambodia is not just Cambodia. They are pieces. And if one tips, what happens next? Policy advisors draft reports. Military strategists draw maps. Intelligence agencies estimate probabilities. But beneath all the analysis, one emotion drives urgency. Loss. Loss of influence. Loss of credibility. Loss of global leadership. Because in the early Cold War, credibility is everything. If America promises protection and fails to act, allies may doubt it. If allies doubt it, alliances weaken. If alliances weaken, influence shrinks. And influence, in a bipolar world, equals survival. O ambiente perfido para una teoria. By the early 1950s, the atmosphere is set. A powerful rival. A recent loss in China. A hot war in Korea. Domestic political pressure. Fear does not appear dramatic. It appears rational, calculated. Leaders are not acting recklessly. They believe they are preventing catastrophe. But prevention can become projection, and projection can become policy. What begins as a defensive mindset slowly transforms into a framework for action, a way of seeing the world not as independent nations, but as falling pieces in a global contest. This is the climate in which the domino theory is born, not out of aggression, not out of ambition alone, but out of a belief that history is moving, and that if America does not stop it, it may not be able to catch up. And in the next section, that belief will be spoken aloud, clearly, publicly, and once it is said, it cannot be unsaid. By 1954, the fear is no longer quiet. It has moved from classified briefings into public conversation. The Cold War is not abstract anymore. It has names, front lines, headlines, and now it needs clarity, because fear without definition creates confusion, but fear with structure becomes policy. A pregunta que muda tudo. April 7, 1954. A press conference in Washington. President Dwight D. Eisenhower stands before reporters. Calm, measured, direct. He is asked about Indochina, about Vietnam, about what would happen if it fell to communism. His answer is not long. It is not dramatic, but it is precise. He describes a row of dominoes. You have a row of dominoes set up, he explains. You knock over the first one, and what will happen to the last one is the certainty that it will go over very quickly. In that moment, an idea becomes official, not speculation, not internal theory, public doctrine. A metaphora que simplifica o mundo. The power of the metaphor is its simplicity. No long strategy papers. No complex geopolitical analysis. Just a visual. One piece falls. The rest follow. It makes global politics understandable to the average citizen. It makes distant regions feel connected. And it transforms Southeast Asia from a regional conflict into a strategic line of defense. Vietnam is no longer just a former French colony in turmoil. It becomes the first domino. Laos and Cambodia stand behind it. Then Thailand. Then perhaps Malaysia. And beyond that, uncertainty. The teoria a compromiso. Once spoken publicly, the metaphor carries weight, because now if Vietnam falls, it is not only a local defeat, it becomes proof. Proof that the theory was right, or proof that America failed to stop it. Either outcome carries consequences. Allies are watching. France is struggling to hold Indochina. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu is unfolding. Communist forces are advancing, and the United States faces a choice. Intervene directly, provide support, or risk appearing passive. Eisenhower does not send combat troops yet, but financial aid increases. Military advisors expand. Commitment deepens. Step by step, quietly. A presseo interna. At home, the political climate reinforces the doctrine. No leader wants to appear soft on communism. The memory of losing China still lingers. The Korean War has already demonstrated that America will fight to contain expansion. To suddenly withdraw from Southeast Asia would contradict everything that came before. Consistency becomes strategy. Credibility becomes shield. Because in a bipolar world, perception matters almost as much as power. If allies doubt American resolve, they may hedge their bets. If adversaries sense hesitation, they may test boundaries. So the domino metaphor is not only about geography, it is about reputation. O peso das palavras. Eisenhower likely did not intend to create a permanent doctrine. He was answering a question, explaining a concern, offering logic. But metaphors have a way of solidifying. They move from explanation to expectation, from expectation to obligation, and soon, policymakers begin using the same language. Dominoes, chain reactions, regional collapse. What began as an analogy becomes a framework. What began as caution becomes commitment. O momento de neo ritorno. Once the theory is public, walking away becomes harder. If Vietnam stabilizes, the theory gains validation. If Vietnam destabilizes, pressure to intervene increases. Either way, the United States is now tied to the outcome, not by treaty alone, but by narrative. Because once a president tells the nation that one fall could trigger many, doing nothing becomes riskier than doing something, even if that something grows, gradually, incrementally, beyond original expectations. A idea que ganho vida propria. The domino theory now lives outside a single speech. It enters briefings, campaign debates, strategic planning rooms. It shapes how intelligence is interpreted. It influences how threats are measured. It becomes part of the Cold War vocabulary. And the most important shift is subtle. The question is no longer whether Vietnam matters. The question becomes how much America is willing to risk to prevent the first domino from falling. In the next section, that question will move from theory to action. And once action begins, it will not be easy to contain. For years, it was a theory, a metaphor, a warning, a projection of what might happen. But theories do not stay still. They wait for a moment. And in the early 1960s, that moment arrives. Vietnam is no longer a distant concern. It is unstable, divided, fragile. North Vietnam is backed by communist allies. South Vietnam is supported by the United States. At first, American involvement is limited. Advisors, funding, training. No official war. Just assistance. But assistance has a way of expanding. A escalada silenciosa. Each year, the number grows. A few thousand advisors become tens of thousands. Helicopters replace briefings. Bases replace offices. Still, the public narrative remains controlled. America is helping, preventing collapse, containing expansion. The domino theory hangs quietly in the background, unspoken but understood. If South Vietnam falls, the first domino tips, and no one in Washington wants to be responsible for that first movement. O momento decisivo. Then comes 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Reports of attacks on American naval vessels. Urgency spreads through Washington. Congress passes the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. It grants the president authority to take all necessary measures. No formal declaration of war, but permission, broad, expansive, flexible. And with that resolution, the path changes. This is no longer advisory support. This is escalation. A guerre s'est torn a reel. By 1965, American combat troops land in Vietnam. The numbers climb quickly. 100,000, 200,000, eventually over 500,000. Young men are drafted. Families watch evening news reports. Jungle warfare replaces policy debates. The domino theory is no longer academic. It is operational. Every village defended. Every hill contested. Not only for territory, but for credibility. Because now the stakes are larger than Vietnam. If America withdraws, what message does that send? To allies in Asia? To NATO partners in Europe? To rivals watching closely? The war becomes proof of resolve, a diviso interna. But as the war intensifies overseas, division intensifies at home. Television brings the battlefield into living rooms. Casualty numbers rise. Protests begin on college campuses. Questions grow louder. Is Vietnam truly the first domino? Or is it a civil conflict shaped by local history? If the theory is wrong, what are the consequences? Yet leadership remains firm. Withdrawal, many argue, would confirm weakness. And weakness, in the Cold War, invites pressure. So the war continues. More troops, more airstrikes, more commitment. Each step justified by the same underlying belief. Stopping one fall prevents many. A Teoria M test. Years pass. The war does not produce clear victory. It produces endurance. North Vietnam remains determined. The conflict stretches beyond expectations. And slowly, doubts begin to form. If dominoes fall quickly, why has the region not collapsed? If communism spreads automatically, why are neighboring countries not tipping in sequence? These questions grow, quietly at first, then publicly. Still, the machinery of war is in motion. Policies once shaped by metaphor are now driven by momentum, and momentum is difficult to reverse. A transformacio do idea em realidade. What began as a theory to prevent instability has created a prolonged conflict, not because leaders sought war, but because they feared the consequences of inaction. The domino theory framed every decision. Escalation felt safer than retreat. Commitment felt safer than doubt. And so, the United States becomes deeply embedded in Vietnam, not only militarily, but psychologically. The war is no longer just about stopping communism. It is about preserving credibility, defending promises, proving resolve. And as the years unfold, the central question becomes unavoidable. What if the domino never truly existed? In the next section, That question will move from protest signs into historical evaluation, and the outcome may not be what policymakers once feared. By the early 1970s, exhaustion sets in, not only on the battlefield, but across the country. Negotiations begin in Paris. Troop levels slowly decrease. The policy shifts from escalation to withdrawal. Vietnamization becomes the strategy. The goal is clear: reduce American presence, transfer responsibility to South Vietnam. After years of commitment, the United States is preparing to step back, carefully, gradually, publicly. O memento final. In 1975, Saigon falls. Images circle the world. Helicopters lifting off rooftops. Crowds gathering at embassy gates. A government collapsing. South Vietnam becomes unified under communist control. The first domino, according to the theory, has fallen. For years, leaders warned that this would trigger collapse across Southeast Asia. That one fall would set off a chain reaction. Now the world watches. What happens next? Ariakeo Mkdia Oyuneo? Laos and Cambodia do fall to communist movements. That much is true. But beyond them, the region does not collapse in rapid sequence. Thailand does not fall. Malaysia does not fall. Indonesia does not fall. The sweeping chain reaction many feared does not fully materialize. Some nations stabilize, others adjust. Regional politics prove more complex than a simple line of dominoes. History resists clean metaphors. A reevaluation. Scholars begin to question the original assumption. Was Southeast Asia truly a single, connected structure, or a collection of distinct histories, cultures, and internal dynamics? Did local nationalism play a greater role than global ideology? With distance, the domino theory appears less certain. It was not irrational. It was not invented from nothing. Communism had expanded in parts of the world. Alliances were shifting. The Cold War was real. But the idea of automatic, unstoppable collapse now seems overstated. What once felt inevitable now feels conditional. Credibilidad y consecuencia. Yet even if the dominoes did not fall as predicted, the impact of the theory remains undeniable. It shaped policy. It justified intervention. It prolonged commitment. More than 58,000 American lives were lost in Vietnam. Countless Vietnamese lives were lost as well. A generation was defined by the conflict. Trust in government shifted. Public skepticism deepened. Foreign policy debates became more cautious. The so-called Vietnam Syndrome influenced decisions for years. All of this traces back, in part, to an idea, an analogy, a warning about falling pieces. O legado de teoria. The domino theory did not disappear after Vietnam. It transformed. Future interventions would often carry echoes of the same logic. If we do not act now, what will happen later? If we allow one crisis to unfold, what signal does it send? The language changes. The regions change. But the underlying concern about credibility and momentum remains. History rarely repeats exactly, but patterns of thinking endure. Encerramento. In the end, the domino theory was not simply about Southeast Asia. It was about fear of loss. Loss of influence. Loss of standing. Loss of control in a rapidly shifting world. It offered clarity in uncertain times. A simple image in a complex era. But simplicity can conceal complexity. And once a nation commits to stopping the first domino, it must decide how long it is willing to stand behind it. The theory promised prevention. The reality delivered consequence. And decades later, the question still lingers. Was it a necessary safeguard in a dangerous world, or a metaphor that carried more weight than history could support? The dominoes did fall, just not always in the way they were imagined. And sometimes, the most powerful forces in history are not armies or weapons, but ideas, spoken at the right moment, in the right room, with the world listening.